Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. We will be beginning in 2 minutes. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the fourth session of the Capital Conviction webinar series. I'm Dipit Gupta, Associate at Phenomenon Investments, and your host today. Thank you for taking out time on this Tuesday evening to join us. Capital Conviction webinar is created for one simple reason: to cut through the noise and bring fact based, no hype insights into the most important capital allocation decisions. These include planning investments, taxes, estate, mortgage, insurance, among other personal finance topics. Whether you're building wealth for your family, looking for passive income, or just sharpening your due diligence process, this webinar series is designed to help you approach capital allocation decisions with clarity and high conviction. For those of you who are new to Phenomenon, we are a fee-only registered investment advisor based in Washington, built on the principle of transparency and client obsession. We serve corporate managers and executives as a family office, providing personalized financial planning and investment management services. Sorry about that. Now I'm excited to announce our guest today, Andrea Yenawine. Andrea is the founder and principal advisor at Franchise Harmoney, a specialized franchisee consulting firm that helps professionals evaluate and select franchisee opportunities with clarity and confidence. She brings deep experience in franchisee consulting and entrepreneurship and works closely with corporate professionals exploring supplemental income or career transitions, business owners seeking diversification, and individuals looking for purpose aligned ownership opportunities. In the next hour, Andrea will help us unpack how franchising works at the unit economics level, what separates strong models from risky ones, and how professionals can evaluate franchisee opportunities with realism and confidence. After Andrea's presentation, we'll have the Q&A, so feel free to note your questions along the way. With that, I'll pass it over to Andrea for the presentation.
Thank you so much, David. I will share my screen and we will get going. Make sure everyone can see okay. Good. Well, welcome. I'm Andrea from Franchise Harmoney, and that's spelled M-O-N-E-Y. That's what I like to help my people do, make money. I am just going to give you some educational information today about franchising, what it's all about, maybe even a little bit what it's not about, and really just talk about franchising as a strategic investment as well as just, a different career strategy and opportunity. So thank you. Let's get going here. All right. So why do people typically explore franchising? There's many reasons, but some of the biggest ones are, alternate income possibilities, higher income, owning your own business allows for that, not just supplemental income, but higher income levels. as well as, being more in control of your own time. Um, as we all know, market volatility is a big thing right now too. And so having and owning a franchise, owning your own business really, but franchising as well, um, provides you some adaptability when things go maybe a little sour or when there's a downturn in the economy, like some of what we're experiencing right now. And kind of with that is optionality, the ability to diversify your income. So maybe you also have a W-2 job while you're running your franchise. That gives you, a little more financial security in the sense that you have your W-2 job, but you also are building money and building income through your franchise. So some people do it that way as well. And then one of the last things that, not the only thing, but one of the last things that's very common for people to explore franchising is they really are looking for something they can do while they maintain their W-2 job or something, maybe they're retired and they just want something a little more, a little extra income. There is a semi-passive potential in franchising where you don't necessarily have to spend 40, 50, 60 hours a week on your franchise. You can, spend less time in it. You can even hire a manager and employees to run it for you. It's not completely passive, but does have some franchises do have a semi-passive opportunity. So it's a little less stress, a little less of a time commitment, but you're still making extra income. And you can change that at any point and be more active in your company as you choose. So let's talk a little bit initially about what franchising really is. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there, or maybe even just not a lot of knowledge about what franchising really is. So it's the opportunity to purchase a company and buy into a franchise, a company that already exists, a model that already exists for starting your own business. So you're under a franchisor, but it's your business. You own it. But there's already proven methodology, a proven system, and it really comes with a playbook, like a roadmap. How do I start? What's my step one? What's my step two? Where do I go? What's my path? That is all a part, one of the key elements of franchising. It comes with an actual roadmap for you. So you're not starting from scratch. You're not inventing anything really. There's already a system set up. And there's always training from the franchisor, almost always, as well as ongoing support. In fact, some franchisors actually offer a full-blown business coach for maybe the first year you're in business. They really want you to get up and running and right away as soon as possible and be very, very successful. So franchising really comes with an established system, a playbook, as well as training and an established brand. And that's really important. In many cases, the brand is already well known, potentially nationally known, and that's already been built for you. So it's things are already set in motion for you. And again, back to the semi-absent owner potential, there is a lot of potential in that arena to have more flexibility in terms of how you run your business, how you manage it. Maybe you work more on your business rather than in your business. So you have maybe a manager who's running things for you. So you have less day-to-day involvement, but you're out there maybe doing more networking and marketing and actually working on your business and building it and growing it, and working on that strategy while someone else runs the day-to-day for you. And then eventually, as you grow your franchise, there's opportunities for it to become maybe even more passive, a little closer to passive income, as you can step further and further back out of the business as it grows and becomes, an entity of itself. And if you have, the right employees managing it for you. Um, One of the things that's very popular and just one of the benefits of owning a franchise and buying into a franchise is there really is some predictable cash flow. These businesses have been vetted and this model has been vetted sometimes, 20, 30 times, or maybe 20, 30, 40 different owners, sometimes hundreds of times. There's maybe hundreds of owners out there who've used the same model, the same system to start their business. So there's a lot of key things that have already been determined, and the franchise already has things laid out for you. And so probability over time is a little more predictable because there is a system and a path already set out. And they often have a lot of data in terms of what their owners have already done in the past. But the things that really, collectively determine that kind of predictable cash flow is anything from customer demand to the pricing in the business and your products and how it's being operated, if it's operated efficiently enough. And in a franchise situation, again, you have a path, a roadmap for all those things. And oftentimes they're already set for you, or you already have information from the franchisor telling you the best path for your customer pricing or for your pricing strategies, your customer demand, how to handle that kind of demand, how to initiate that kind of demand. That's all been set up for you. So in a lot of ways, it's set up for you, and you have some predictable or some idea of what that cash flow is going to look like because there is a lot of data from previous owners and in history within that franchise. Not all, some franchises are fairly new, and we'll talk about that a little later, but most have some sort of a data-driven information for you as you start your business. And then again, just the manager run versus owner run. That can change whether you run your business yourself, owner run, or whether you hire somebody to run it for you. That can change the cash flow for obvious reasons. And in some ways it can make it better, and in some ways it can make it a little less. Obviously, if you hire a general manager to run the business for you, while maybe you're working on marketing and networking and that kind of thing, you have to pay that general manager's salary. So that is going to reduce your profit to some degree and increase your expenses. However, that gives then you, the owner, the time to work on gathering more leads and doing more networking and maybe having more community involvement and getting your name out there and your company out there. So it doesn't always, and that it's in and of itself can lead to more profit. So it doesn't always mean, manager run means less profit, but it is something to consider. There's two sides to that coin. You can run it as an owner, save some money, or you could hire a manager to run it for you, spend more money, but then you may have more time to work on other things like networking and increasing leads and things like that. So there's a couple different systems there, and those two models are very different, and so they do and will affect your cash flow. Changes the dynamics. So that's just something important to know and understand before jumping into it. Um, so I just also wanted to touch base on what franchising isn't. I think a lot of times when people think of franchising, they think of McDonald's. That's the picture here, McDonald's or Starbucks or maybe, Chick-fil-A, things like that. Now, those are franchises, but those are not all the options in the franchising world. And it's one of the reasons why I love to talk to people and educate people about what's in franchising. There's really so much more. But first, I just want to reiterate, it's not a passive investment. There can be times when you work it into a passive investment. Maybe you start off and you build it, you spend a year or two building it, working strong and working into the business as an owner operator. Maybe you hire a GM right away. You could as well work together to build that business, and then you can be less involved as time goes on. And then there are some people who build and they purchase, one or two franchises, and then they take that money and then they purchase more and they start to build this bigger like conglomerate of franchises and a bigger empire. And then that's when it can become a little more passive in the sense that maybe you have a couple GMs or people running the whole business for you. But initially it's not passive. And I think it's important to understand that that can be a myth that I just don't want people to, I want them to realize that it is definitely active ownership. And then sometimes you can be semi-passive active, semi-active owner. Depends on the franchise. It depends on the scenario. And that's all important to know as you go into things. And it's not just a retail location. That's really why I like to talk to people about it. There are so many home-based options that don't involve a retail space. They don't involve a brick and mortar. A lot of mobile opportunities like, mobile pet grooming, mobile home services, different things like that, where maybe you just have a truck or a van, and things are run out of a home, or even a home office. And that allows for lower overhead, which allows for higher profit, and definitely much faster return on investment and more flexibility in your schedule. You don't have to have your retail location open from 9 to 5 every day or whatever the case may be. So franchising isn't just the McDonald's down the street. It isn't just a brick and mortar. And I think that's important to spread the word about that. There's a lot more opportunities out there than just a retail location. And there are retail location opportunities too. So Optionality and career flexibility is a big reason why people jump into franchising. It really allows for a different lifestyle, even for with more freedom. And we've talked about a few of these things. I've touched on a few of these things already. But things like supplemental income, maintaining your W-2 while having additional income. It also can allow for a transition out of your W-2. So perhaps someone buys into their franchise and they're still working their W-2 and they're, building their franchise so that eventually they want to transition out. Actually, I have a lot of people that's their ultimate goal is to transition out of their W-2 once their franchise is making the money that enough to replace their W-2 income. And that's a real possibility. And that can be done without, just an abrupt change of, quitting your W-2 and starting a new business where you have this gap where you have very little to no income. It can be more of a transition, a bridge, if you will. It definitely allows for more control over your time, control over your money, control over whether you have a job or not, whether you have income or not. You're not reliant on a corporation or a manager to tell you, today you still have a job, tomorrow you may not. You have a lot more control over that, as well as, work-life balance, what you can do in that arena. Tailor your own level of involvement. Like I said, you could run it yourself or hire a manager, um, different things. And one of the great optionalities about franchising is the ability to really build true wealth, um, not just, not just money in the bank, but actually businesses that are working for you. And that maybe potentially could become, a passive income source in the future, but you really have the ability to scale, either buying multi-units or buying different kinds of brands, different kinds of franchises. I know one gentleman who I think he owns 30 Domino's pizzas and 20 other fast food restaurant franchise. So he's really building his empire, and he started with a couple, and then from there just scales and builds up. So there's a lot of opportunity to do that, as well as to buy a franchise, build it up for a few years, and then sell it, kind of flip it. Some franchises do allow for that opportunity, not all, but there are some that will allow you to flip it within a couple years and, make 2 or 3 or 4 times EBITDA and get a chunk of change and move on and do something else with your life. So there's a lot of opportunities and a lot of options in franchising. I did want to talk briefly about why engineers and executives are attracted to franchising. I have a lot of clients who are in the engineering field and executive level. There's definitely a through line here. Franchising involves systems, processes, paths and playbooks. And a lot of that is already involved in engineering life and in the executive level. So there's a lot of synergy here. And so I do see a lot of engineers and executives who are interested in franchising, and they actually do very well in it. With you're already comfortable with the systems and processes, KPIs, different things like that. Leadership and management skills are really crucial in franchising and very, very helpful, especially if you're going to run the business and not necessarily hire a general manager. All that comes with, the engineering field and executive level. Um, it's good to be able to know how to analyze your risk when you're first buying in, as well as when you're actually operating and doing different things through your franchising business. And then again, there's the semi-passive manager-run models. Those are all very similar to what happens in the engineering world and what executive level people do in their job already. So there's a lot of synergy there and a lot of ways that they can excel in the franchising world. Um, I do an assessment initially when my clients come to me, and I find that very, very key and very helpful to understand, A, is franchising even really for you or for the person I'm talking to? So I wanted to just touch on a few things here that's helpful to understand whether you would be a fit for franchising, for being a franchise owner. It's very much a systems oriented structure, and that's great. That's why you have a path, you have a roadmap. But systems aren't for everyone. So if you're like, I hate systems, I like to just do my own thing, definitely not for me, then franchising may not be for you, and that's okay. Um, but it for a lot of people, that's very helpful to have a systems mindset and to be, in that organizational space. Leadership is important. You have to be a little comfortable with leadership to some degree. Unless you're going to hire a general manager right away, then maybe you can kind of get away with that to some degree. But it is helpful to have that kind of experience. It's important to know to some degree what your financial requirements are. Like what is it going to take to be successful in this business, and to have the ability to wrap your head around that. It's definitely important in any business, but especially in franchising as well. And then your ability to balance your commitments. What kind of time management skills do you have, and what kind of time do you actually have? So, if you're working a 9 to 5 and you don't work from home, or you don't have flexibility in that job, unless you're going to come in right away and hire a general manager, then maybe that's going to determine what kind of franchise, if any, will be a good fit for you. Because if you don't really have flexibility in your W-2 and you don't want to leave your W-2, then that's going to create a lot less opportunity for you. But if you have flexibility in that, or you want to hire a general manager right away, then that's different. Then you still have the opportunity to do that. But you still have to be able to manage your time, because you're going to be working your W-2 and leading your business to some degree as well. And lastly, what I find to be very, very important is, how much does this business align with your personal goals and values, as well as your professional ones? Like, what do you really want to do? What do you want to get out of this franchise? You probably don't want to be buying into, like a Cold Stone or something if you're super, super um, health oriented, and your health values are very, very strong. You don't ever eat ice cream. Well, then maybe a Cold Stone isn't a fit for you. But it's important. But there are other things out there that would be right. But it's important to understand your alignment. You wouldn't want to buy a butcher franchise if you're vegetarian because of animal cruelty, right? So you want to make sure there's a through line, and that it works for your personal values as well as your goals. Those are a couple things to really look at to understand if franchising is a fit, as well as what if a particular franchise is a fit for you. And this is kind of where we get to this next step. Once you determine that franchising is for you, how do you really match which particular franchise is good for you? There's a couple of key things. These are probably more the main ones that I really look at and I really help people with. Is what's your work style? Do you want to manage people, or do you not want to manage people? If you don't really want to manage people, if you don't really want to have employees, there's options out there. There's plenty of franchises out there that are really just sole proprietor. It's just you working your business, or maybe you and one or two employees. And then there's ones that you're going to have 30 employees. If you buy a Jamba Juice, you're probably going to have 30 employees or more, or maybe 20 or so. You're going to have a lot. But it's good to understand that, like, what's your work style? How do you like to manage? Who do you like to manage? Do you like to manage people? And then narrow that down. How much risk are you willing to take? I think I mentioned previously that there are many franchises that have been around for a very, very long time. And so they have a lot of data. And so you can really see the numbers. And then there are newer, more emerging brands that really have some amazing potential, but they have very little to no data, because they're just coming out. They're just brand new. They don't have 3, 4, 5, 20 years worth of data. And for some people, that's too much of a risk, but for others, they're right in it, and they're like, yeah, let's go with the emerging brand. I see the potential. I'm there. So risk tolerance is also important and good to know too. And then capital investment is really, really important. How much money do you really have? How much money are you willing to borrow? Because it helps can you actually run this business till it's profitable? Do you have the option and the finances to scale it at some point if you really want to? All those things are key things to understand about what's going on for you and what's going on for that particular franchise, to know if it's a match for you. So let's talk just briefly about what franchising looks like, the financial side of things. Speaking of capital, um, there's a huge range of buy-in costs for franchising, but typically a total initial investment for a home-based franchise is about $75,000 to maybe about 125, 100. It can go upwards from that. I mean, in the end, you can spend as much as you want, really. Every once in a while, you'll find one that's a little less than 75,000. There was one recently that was about 50,000. It ebbs and flows, but 75,000 starting point is a pretty good a pretty good idea to have for home-based ones. And then for brick and mortar, it's usually about 350,000 and up. There's some that are less than that. Depends on how big of a space you need and where you're located. Obviously Seattle's more expensive than some cities, things like that. But that's a good range of what it looks like. And obviously that money, we'll talk about that the last bullet here, but that money does not need to all come from your pocket. Most of that can get financed. I always say it's better to use other people's money if you can when you start your business and save your money for operating costs and things like that down the road should you need it, and expenses, your own living expenses. The other thing to note about financially in a franchise is that recurring revenue and repeat business is very important, especially if you're going to plan to resell it at any point. You plan to jump out and sell it to someone else. Any kind of regular monthly revenue or regular revenue is very popular and very helpful in terms of, your selling point at some point. It's also just good because then you have that, again, that predictable cash flow. And I skipped a bullet, but margins and EBITDA are much more important than really your top line revenue. And the reason is you could make $2 million gross profit, but if your expenses are 1.9, you've only made $100,000 that year. That's not much in the grand scheme of things. If you're making 2 million and you think you're going to take home a lot more. So it's really important to look at margins, the profit margin, and what the, expenses before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization really look like, or sorry, earnings before interest and all that. Those are numbers that really matter more when you're looking at a franchise and whether you should buy into that, as well as how successful it is. And then again, multi-unit expansion is great. It can definitely significantly amplify your profit if you have a couple locations versus just one. Some people will buy a few locations initially, and then open those, kind of in order. Sometimes they open all three at once. It just depends. But the franchise will help with that. Franchisor will help with that. Sometimes it just makes more sense to buy multiple locations. You want more than one. You can buy them up front and save money. And then you can also make sure you secure those territories in those areas. And again, there's many ways to finance, not just SBA loans. There's something called ROBS, which stands for rollover. I always forget the first word. Rollover startup business. It's the opportunity to take money out of a 401k and without any penalties from the IRS. You don't actually have to pay it back at any point. You're basically taking money out of a 401k and you're investing it in your new business. You do really need to pay somebody to run that program for you. It's a couple $1,000s. But you're saving that by not having to pay the IRS when you pull it out. It's a great opportunity to do another type of financing, but there's all different ways: portfolio loans, lines of credit, unsecured lines of credit, maybe even family members. There's a lot of financing options out there, so keep that in mind as well. There are a lot of opportunities for different ways. And I just wanted to highlight a couple of industries that are pretty good for professionals that are kind of popular right now, and have been popular for a very long time. Home services are great. Things like window washing, senior care. There's just a gamut of home services, and most of those are run from they're home based, so they cost less to get into. You can certainly have a retail location if you want. STEM is very popular these days for obvious reasons. Science and technology, all of that. Engineering is huge. And unfortunately, our school systems are really not teaching the kids, I think, to the strongest degree that they could be. So owning a STEM franchise is really close to my heart. Actually, it's something that I like to help people look into because I think it's great. You have this ability to make a lot of money, actually. They can be very profitable. They can be home-based or retail or brick and mortar locations. But you also have the ability to help kids and really impact the future generations. And then there's a lot of B2B opportunities in franchising, which is great as well. Things like digital marketing, IT services, a lot of different opportunities. I just wanted to highlight a few. There's also so many others: pets, automobiles. Like if you name an industry, there's probably a franchise for it. I just wanted to highlight very quickly some common mistakes, some red flags, some things to be aware of and look for when you're out there. If you don't have someone like me helping you, to be aware of when you're looking at franchises, you want to make sure it has a good brand reputation. Obviously, you want to make sure you're clear about what your territory looks like. Where's your location? Are there any competing businesses nearby? Where are other locations in that particular brand? How close are they to you? And the franchisor helps you with that as well. But it's good for you to understand that and what that looks like. Again, making sure you're aware it's not completely passive. And then in the next slide, I'll tell you a little bit about the process that we go through. But you want to make sure that you're doing your due diligence and you're really validating things and talking to current owners. And then just being aware of other risks, things like, I mean, right now we're dealing with some flooding. You want to make sure your location is a good location, one that doesn't have other risks. And there's a lot of different things, but just being aware of what those risks are and making sure that you're knowledgeable before you go into it is very important. You want to be successful. So just quickly, this is kind of what the franchise process journey looks like. There's definitely some steps in between here, depending on the franchise or depending on your situation. Each individual, has a different scenario, but these are kind of the highlights and the main points. Initially, you really want to look at your goals, your values, your budget. What are you really looking for? And that's something I do with my clients, something you could do on your own. And then you create a short list of what franchises match that. Those first two steps are really the crux of what I do with my people. And then at some point you kind of work in with the franchise or whatever franchise you've chosen. I typically don't do any more than three, more like one or two that I offer first to my clients. So I would start with a small list and then maybe start talking to those franchisers. And then, if one or two of those don't work, maybe you go back to the drawing board and find a few more. This is kind of the process I go through with my people. And then you talk to the franchisor when you settle down on one or two. You talk to those franchisers, you get more information from them. And one of the first things they will do with you is provide a franchise disclosure document. And this is a very thick document, but it contains very critical information about what it costs to buy into the franchise, what it costs to start it up, what does the performance look like? Like I said, what have previous owners done? Has a lot of good information, and that's one of the first things that they will do with you. And then you go through a few more steps with them, depending on the franchise, or everybody has a different process to some degree, but there's a lot of commonality. And then you reach the validation process or validation point in the process. And that's when you really want to talk to other owners, current owners, and find out more like what's it really like, boots on the ground? What's your day-to-day look like? And really get their perspective so you really understand what it would look like for you to be in business. Now, everybody's different, just because if one owner operates a certain way doesn't mean you have to operate that way or you will have the same output, but it's good to hear what's happening for them. That's why it's always good to talk to a few different owners, not just one. And then lastly, you do what's called a discovery day, where you actually meet with a franchisor and their whole team. And you are making sure they're a fit for you just as much as they're making sure you're a fit for them. You want to understand their culture and make sure that it's all a good fit. And then usually at that point, they'll, if it's all still good and you're still interested, they'll have you sign a franchise agreement and pay the fees and go forward with them. So just to recap, some of the key things we talked about, the systems in franchising, very effective. It's really what makes it successful, makes franchising is very successful, reduces the risks because of that system and that roadmap. Make sure you're doing your due diligence. Very, very important. Research is important. Make sure you have people who help you if you can. I know Phenomenon can do things like that as well. Helping people analyze the business aspect of before purchasing. There's great long-term upside for this, sustainable growth, a lot of freedom in your life once you build it. Great long-term strategy for personal investment. Cash flow, crucial, critical. You got to make sure you've got good cash flow and that the financial health of your business going into it and while you're in it is important to be aware of before you even step into it. What's it going to look like for you? What kind of cash flow do you need for the first year, for maybe even the first couple years? Very important to look at. And then again, making sure that aligns with your goals personally. And don't forget the optionality. positive side of things that it can really support, career flexibility as well as true financial freedom in your life, which is really what I love helping people do. Final thoughts, assessment is super important. That's how I always start with people. Franchising isn't everyone, and that's fine. And it's good to know. You should really know that before you jump into it. And then this is a great strategic investment. It's fantastic um, alternative, different type of investment for long-term financial strategy to help with your optionality, your financial freedom, your life freedom, more cash flow, more retirement funds, whatever it is you're looking for. And really, franchising goes way beyond traditional options. It really offers a lot more life control, structure, and really I think one of the best parts of franchising is the ease of scaling. Um, it's very easy to scale and to just buy another franchise or buy another type of franchise, buy a multi-unit. The scalability is there and ready and waiting for anybody who's interested in it. That is what I have to say today. I just want to also say, I think we're going to jump into Q&A. I'm happy to answer any questions at any point. So give me a call or drop me a line if you have any questions about it. And I'll pass it back to you, Dippet. Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot, Andrea. That was really insightful, grounded, and clear. So we'll open the floor to questions now. You can type them in the chat, or you can also raise your hand if you would like to come off of mute. And in the meanwhile, we have some questions that we prepared, some, general questions that our clients have, and some that we got from registrants before.
Great.
So till then, we can delve into that. So, Andrea, most professionals who are exploring franchising already really have a demanding job, equity compensation, and a long-term financial plan. And this is something we especially see with a lot of our clients.
Mhm.
So, how should someone think about franchising alongside their career and investments, as a use of surplus capital and time, rather than as an all or nothing career pivot?
Yeah, so it's important to, I think it offers a great opportunity to have additional income and like I said, maybe even transition out of your W-2. But it's important to understand what does your W-2 look like for you? How flexible is it? Like I mentioned before, if you're working from home, that's great. If you have to be in the office 9 to 5 or 10 to 6 or whatever, and you can't make phone calls once in a while or take a few minutes to do something personal once in a while, that may not be a good fit for you, in which case you might need a partner or a general manager, or maybe just that's just maybe not the best for you. But most of the time, franchising fits in pretty well. But knowing how much flexibility you have with your current job, and then paying attention to what franchise allows that, because some franchises they want you to be in there 40, 50, 40 plus hours a week. But others are like, no, 10, 15, 20 hours a week is fine. So maybe you take time on the weekends or in the evening to really build your business. And then as you build it up, maybe then you could pull away or you could still maintain your job. There's plenty of people do. I actually know a woman who she works in the franchising world and the franchise development company, and she works full time for a franchise development company, and she owns 5 Pilates studios, 5 franchises. And she has GMs who run them for her. So she runs her full-time job and she has her businesses. So it's very doable. It's just important to understand what your W-2 looks like, how flexible is it, and then find the right franchise that can work within your time availability and your financial availability and your long-term plans. Like, what is your investment strategy? What is your long-term plan for this?
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And you know how, like, obviously situations in life are never static. So my next question to you would be someone who's exploring franchisees. So a franchisee that fits today might not fit, 5 years from now, 10 years
Mhm.
from now, based on their personal situations because careers evolve, children grow, their priorities might shift. So what structural decisions can someone take early on to preserve that flexibility? Like exit options, management layers, or resale value?
Yeah, so I think it's important to understand what the franchise looks like. Like, is this something that you can build? And then, in a few years, if you wanted to sell it, um, for some people, that's not their goal at all. For some people, they want to build something and pass it to their kids. But for some people, like again, life does change. But for some people, they're really like, this is something I want to work for maybe 5, 10 years, maybe only 3 years, and then I want to sell it. Or we're here for the next 10 years and then we're planning to eventually move where maybe our grandchildren will be eventually, or whatever the case may be. It's important to just look at how viable is that in that particular franchise. And that is something I help people with too. I want to make sure that if eventually I did have somebody recently, he's like, look, I want to do this for a few years, and then I think I'm probably going to want to move on to something else. He's like, does this franchise fit that model? And it really did. And I'm like, absolutely, this is one of the better ones for that. So it's important to just understand, what does a franchise actually look like? If it's a franchise and you're running it solely on your own, you could still sell it, but that's going to be less attractive to somebody versus a franchise that has recurring passive income, already has employees, it already has a system set up. And if you're going to sell it, they just kind of drop in. You drop out as an owner and they drop in, and you've already got a system set up. But if it's just you running the show, that is going to be a little harder, because they're going to have to come in and be right away full blown owner. So just a couple things to look at ahead of time. You know, if that is your potential plan, and you know it up front, it's definitely something you want to look at the franchise. What's the structure of the franchise? And most franchises come with like a 10-year agreement, but that can always be transferred. So it's just good to know that they are sellable. And then, you know, don't understand that it might take a little bit of time, 6 months or so, to really prepare it for sale, if that's your plan. Um, with any business, that's going to be the case, though. So.
Right. So we have a question from Edsel in the chat here.
Mhm.
Is there a typical or average capital requirement for most franchises? And are there any specific ones that you recommend, specifically one with a high ROI?
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, it depends. So home-based franchises, the capital is usually the initial investment. Capital, that's a little different actually. So initial investment, they do require initial investment. And then they also do, um, yeah, sometimes they require it depends on the franchisor. And there's so many franchises out there that it's different, so different. I represent over 600, and there's even more than that. Each franchise is a little different, but some do require that you have maybe $150,000 in, um, available cash capital. And then some require that that you meet a particular um, net worth. Some may say that, the candidate must have at least $500,000 net worth. There really is no typical, however. It really just depends on the franchisor. So, yeah, that's a tough one because it's really across the board. But so typically the conversations that I have it is more, to the person I'm speaking with, the client, the potential candidate. What do you have? What does your situation look like? And then we go out and we match the franchise that fits that. So in other words, like, for example, I don't represent McDonald's, but McDonald's is a $1 million buy-in. And if you don't have $1 million or the ability to borrow $1 million, or if you're not comfortable with $1 million, then you don't even want to go near McDonald's. They also make less than $200,000 a year on average. Not a great return, right? That's going to be about 5 years before you get your money back. I prefer the quicker ones. Um, so I think hopefully that answered the first part of Etzel's question. The second part was quicker ROI. Was that the question? The part of the question?
Yeah, is there any particular ones that you would recommend? And like the metric for that would be like a very high ROI.
Yeah. So um, I'm thinking more high profit, high return. But the ROI, like if you're talking about your initial investment, there are some that you can make that back in less than a year. It just depends on the franchise. Retail is usually harder to get a higher ROI, because you're paying a lot more expenses. So when someone's really looking for a higher ROI or a higher profit margin, I often start with the home-based ones because you're not paying for a retail space. You may not have as many employees. You may not. But home-based ones really offer a much better ROI because your expenses are lower. And so, obviously, if you've got a profit level and you've got lower expenses, you're going to have a higher profit margin, and you're going to earn your initial investment back sooner, more than likely. And often the initial investment is much lower too. So home-based are ones that really fit that model better. But then there are some that are retail that are just either trending, very popular. There's a couple I can think of right now in the health and wellness industry that are very, very popular. They're helping people like with detoxing or body sculpting, things like that. People will pay a lot of money for that right now. They are retail locations, but they do have a pretty good profit structure because their margins are high. They have their products are expensive, and people are willing to pay it. So it kind of just depends. Um, yeah, I'm not sure if that answered that very well, but there's so much out there that it really depends. In particular, I like some mobile pet grooming options, that kind of thing too, because that's definitely lower expense, and people love paying money for their pets. They love to take care of their pets, their animals, and they will pay a lot for it.
Yeah, I would actually like to talk more about how you just mentioned there are some franchises which, right now might be really hot or,
Mhm.
they just might be really popular. So when certain franchises become really popular, home services, fitness, children, food, how do you help clients stay disciplined and avoid overpaying or entering overcrowded markets when the momentum really is just driven by anecdotes?
Yeah. So one of the things we really look at is, uh, you know, is this a sustainable trend? Because trends are great, and some trends are temporary, but some are actually long-term trends. And so that's an important thing to really look at. How sustainable is this as a business? If it's hot right now, is it really going to be hot, 10 years from now? Is it really going to be popular when the economy turns and people aren't spending money? So there are some industries I don't want to say avoid, but I just want to make sure my clients know, hey, this is an industry that if the economy goes down, this is going to be one of the first ones that people stop spending money on. For example, food. When people stop having extra money to spend, they stop going out to eat, right? That's one of the first things that goes by the wayside. Now, is someone going to stop grooming their pet or feeding their pet or taking care of their pet? No, no way. So pets are trending right now. They're huge, but they're always going to be a thing. People are always going to take care of their animals. That's not something that's going to change. So we really just look at the scenario, and to be honest, a lot of times people come to me with a particular brand or a particular type of industry they're interested in. And actually, as we sit down and evaluate it, oftentimes they go with something different because, they had kind of had the outside perspective of it. And when you delve deeper, you see more about it. And that's part of my job is to help them see the full picture, not just the shiny stuff on the outside.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then we have a question from Shabrish in the chat here.
Mhm,
Since you said these are non-passive and time is treated as a form of capital commitment, where
mhm.
does a franchisee most consistently consume it, and which parts are structurally unavoidable in any type of franchisee ownership?
Where do they mostly consume their time?
Yeah,
Yeah. So again, it depends on the franchise, but Um, if you're an owner operator, you're going to probably spend a majority of your time, especially in the beginning, doing networking, getting leads, getting sales, and that depending on the franchise, that could include things like calling people, sales calls, things like that, or it could just be out networking in the community, getting your name out there. However, if you're more of a little more semi-absentee and you've hired a general manager, your general manager could be doing some of that for you. Your employees could be doing some of that for you. But really, realistically, in the beginning, most owners are going to spend a lot of time on sales and procuring leads and getting really that advertising marketing out there. From what I can understand and from what I've seen and from what I've helped people with, that is a majority of the initial time. Now, if you're going to have employees and a general manager, you're obviously going to spend some time on hiring and finding the right people. And then if you do have a retail location, initially you may be spending the majority of your time on the build out. if you actually have to convert the space. Now you're going to hire somebody to do that. But so it kind of depends on what the scenario is. If you're buying a home-based business, a majority of your time is going to be on marketing and networking. If you're buying a retail location, initially it's probably going to be a little bit of the build out, right? Getting your space ready to go. Then you're going to switch to, you might be doing both concurrently, right? Marketing and sales and networking, and building community connections, that kind of thing. As an owner, that's really one of the biggest times spent because you are the owner, you're the face of the business. You can hire a GM to do that for you as well and help you with it. But realistically, that is part of where what you want to be doing out there as much as possible. But again, it doesn't have to be a lot of time spent. And if you've got 40 hours a week to do it, you might be building a little faster. But if you've only got 10 hours a week to do it, you're still going to be out there doing it or hiring people to help you do it. You just may not build quite as fast, but you're still going to build and you're still going to develop your business.
Right. Then we have a question from Deepak. What
Mhm.
level of involvement do you want to see from the franchisor in terms of investment, systems, growth, expansions? Like, because, whenever you're approaching a franchisee, what role does the franchisor play in terms of like a broader question? And what would you typically like to see from the franchisor?
In terms of their involvement level with the owner,
Yes.
a lot. Not all franchises are created equal, and neither are all franchisors. And that's part of my job is to know the good, bad, and the ugly. And unfortunately, most franchises are great and most franchisors and their team are great, but not all are, unfortunately. So there are some out there that aren't very involved. I don't represent Chick-fil-A, but I've had a lot of different people tell me that when you buy into a Chick-fil-A, it's more like buying a job, not buying an ownership, not being an owner. They treat you more like an employee or a general manager rather than an owner. I've also had one or two people tell me that they really like Chick-fil-A and they've loved their investment. So it kind of just depends. But some franchisors, unfortunately, don't treat their people like owners, and they really, really should. So when I know that, I definitely, I've had people come to me and say, "Hey, I was interested in Chick-fil-A." And I'm like, "Well, if you want to do it, great. I can't help you with that, but I also do want to let you know, here is what I know." So I really what I want to see are franchisors that treat their owners like owners, like this is their business. And I love to see franchisors who have business coaching. Almost all franchisors have training. If they don't, the question would be why not, But usually there's a lot of involvement from the initial get-go. And what I really look for is when I ping the franchisor from the beginning. Hey, I've got a client interested. How quickly do they respond? Does it take them 2 weeks to get back to me? If it takes them 2 weeks to get back to me, that's not a great sign. How involved are they really? Unless they're going through something. And, every once in a while, franchisors will go through management change. That's important to track too. That's something I keep an eye on as well, because when management changes, the entire structure can change. And sometimes there's one particular franchisor I'm thinking of about 2 years ago went through a management change, and I don't really recommend them anymore, unfortunately. So it just depends, and things can change over time. But realistically, I like to see that they get back to me quickly, that they're communicating quickly with my clients and well with my clients, that they have a lot of services. That they help, their new owners find a location. They might offer business coaching. They really hold their hand initially, often for the first year. I just like to see that they're very, very involved. The more hands off they are, to me, that's not setting their franchisees up for success. Like, really, I'd like to see more hands on and a lot of involvement in those particular areas. And what's their training look like? Is a good question as well.
Yeah. Since we're nearing the end of time for this session, I wanted to ask this one last question. So, like you said, all franchisees are not built equal, and like similarly, even like the same two branches of McDonald's or Domino's, they're not performing the same, right? And
Right.
like when you hear the advertisement, it's like every franchisee is marketed as this turnkey, repeatable model.
Mhm.
But when you strip away the brand story and the marketing materials, what specific like questions or pain points should someone ask to understand where the economics actually work for an average operator and not just like the, top 1% performers?
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's the question in and of itself to ask the franchisor. what's the average? Like, and the financial disclosure document again has a lot of this information. But you want to actually ask the franchisor, what does it look like for an average um, franchisee? Like, what kind of numbers are they doing? And sometimes, again, that information is in the FDD, but what's their day look like? And to be honest, at that, this is the point where I think these are great questions for the franchisor, but they're also very, very important to ask current owners. This is when the validation process is really, really key. But I think it's important to ask that because the franchisors are always going to tell you they're top of the line. They want you in their system, unless you don't fit. Like obviously they still want you to be successful, but that's where you want to do a little more due diligence on your own and really talk to current owners and see what the story is there. Um, and then questions like um, what's the low end look like too? That's important to know too. But in the end, some of the best questions are like your top of the line or your average, what are they doing different than the people who are on the low end? What are they doing differently? Because you want to know that. You want to know what they're doing that's making them the top and really making them successful because that's valuable information when you actually start your business and run it.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks a lot, Andrea, for all the insights. And
Yeah.
thank you, everyone, for being a part of this conversation today. We'll continue bringing in experienced voices through the series and look forward to hosting our next one. You will hear from us on the next topic and guests soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.